Harlem, August 1931, 11:42 p.m. Rain slicked Lenox Avenue until the streetlights smeared into long yellow scars. Inside the Savoy's back room, past the band, past the dance floor, past the smell of gin and sweat, money changed hands faster than breath. At the center of the table sat Bumpy Johnson, shoulders squared, eyes steady. Dice clacked. Bills slid. A dealer called numbers that sounded like verdicts. By midnight, it was already bad. By 1 a.m., it was catastrophic. Bumpy Johnson had lost $3 million in a single night. Not paper losses, not promises. Cash, markers, future earnings, gone. And he hadn't lost it to nobodies. The money flowed across the table toward men loyal to Dutch Schultz, the Bronx bootlegger who wanted Harlem carved open and handed to him clean. This wasn't a friendly game. It was a message. At 1:17 a.m., the dice rolled one last time. Snake eyes. The room went quiet except for the radiator knocking like a countdown. Bumpy didn't blink. He didn't argue. He didn't flip the table. He stood, buttoned his coat, and said exactly 5 words. "I'll settle before sunrise." That sentence changed the night. Because everyone in that room knew the truth. $3 million did not exist. Not in Harlem. Not at that hour. Not without tearing the neighborhood apart to find it. And Dutch Schultz's men didn't extend credit out of kindness. If the debt wasn't paid, the interest came in bones. Outside, the rain had turned mean. Bumpy walked into it with 2 men behind him and none ahead. He had 6 hours. Here's why that mattered. The money Bumpy lost wasn't just his. It was payroll for numbers runners. It was protection money that kept small clubs from getting burned. It was winter coal for tenement buildings owned by people who trusted him to keep the heat on. If he defaulted, those doors would open to Schultz's collectors, to police raids tipped off at the right time, to men who didn't knock. And Schultz knew it. At 1:33 a.m., a messenger arrived at the Savoy with a folded note. No signature, just an address in the Bronx and a time, 5:30 a.m., under it, 1 line, "Bring what you owe." Bumpy read it once and handed it back. His face stayed calm, but his jaw tightened the way it did when a calculation turned ugly. This was not about dice. It was about leverage. Schultz had engineered the loss to force a choice before dawn. Pay a fortune that would drain Harlem dry, or refuse and invite a takeover enforced by gunfire and indictments. Either way, something vital would be lost. As Bumpy stepped into the night, a woman screamed somewhere down the block. Laughter turned into fear, then silence. The city kept moving. The clock didn't care. $3 million, 6 hours, and an entire neighborhood balanced on what happened next. Because the real danger wasn't the debt. It was what Bumpy Johnson was about to do to erase it, and who would be standing in front of him when the sun came up. What could possibly cover $3 million before sunrise without starting a war? 2:06 a.m.? The rain had thinned to a hiss when Bumpy Johnson stopped outside a closed barbershop on 138th. The pole was dark. The chairs inside were empty. Harlem slept in pieces. Across the street, a man waited under a broken awning, coat too thin for the night. His name was Isaiah Carter, though most people called him Ike, 29 years old, numbers runner. Fast with his feet, careful with his mouth. Ike had been awake for 2 days. His problem wasn't gambling debts or enemies with guns. It was his wife Lillian, coughing blood into a handkerchief that never came clean. Tuberculosis, the doctor said, using a word that sounded like a sentence. The clinic wanted cash up front. So did the landlord. So did the pharmacist who slid medicine across the counter without asking questions. Ike needed money by morning, or Lillian wouldn't see another winter. When Bumpy crossed the street, Ike straightened. Fear lived just under his ribs, but respect kept his hands steady. "You sent for me," Ike said. Bumpy nodded once. "Walk." They moved side by side, footsteps sinking without effort. For a block, neither spoke. Then Bumpy said, "How much did you bring in today?" Ike swallowed. 412. "That's low. The rain cut traffic." Bumpy stopped, looked at him. "I don't need excuses. I need options." Ike knew what that meant. Options were favors that hurt. Options were doors you didn't open unless you were ready to step through them and not come back the same. "I can get more," Ike said quickly. "There's a ledger." "Not money," Bumpy said. "Information." They resumed walking. A police cruiser rolled past slow, the officer's eyes sliding over them like they weren't worth the trouble. Ike felt his pulse in his throat. "There's a place," Ike said after a moment. "Warehouse near the river. Schultz uses it for storage. Cash moves through on Fridays." Bumpy didn't react. "How do you know?" "I run numbers for a man who cleans there. He sees crates. Guards change at 3. Bumpy stopped again. This time the pause felt heavier. "You're sure?" Ike nodded. "I've been sure before." That wasn't comforting. Ike knew it. He added, "I wouldn't say it if I didn't need it to be true." Bumpy studied him. Not like a boss measuring profit, but like a surgeon weighing risk. "Why now?" Bumpy asked. Ike hesitated. This was the moment. Lie and live with it. Or tell the truth and see if it mattered. "My wife," Ike said. "She's sick. I didn't ask why you need money," Bumpy said, cutting him off. "I asked why you're bringing me this." Ike's voice tightened. "Because if Schultz takes Harlem, the clinic's close first. The small ones. The ones that don't ask questions." Silence. Then Bumpy nodded almost to himself. "Here's the truth," Bumpy said. "If what you're telling me is wrong, men die before dawn. If it's right, men still die, but fewer." Ike felt the weight of that settle on his shoulders. He thought of Lillian's breathing at night, shallow and uneven, like the room was shrinking around her. "What do you need from me?" Ike asked. Bumpy leaned in, close enough that Ike could smell tobacco and rain. "I need you to walk me inside that warehouse. And I need you to decide right now who you're loyal to when things go bad." A siren wailed somewhere east, then cut off. The night pressed in. Ike nodded. He didn't trust his voice. They turned toward the river. Behind them, unseen, a man stepped out of a doorway and followed at a distance. Hands in pockets, pace unhurried. Had Ike already been noticed? And if so, by whom? 2:58 a.m. The river smelled like iron and rot. Fog lifted in thin sheets, sliding between the warehouses as if the water itself was creeping onto land. The building Ike had described rose ahead. Brick, unmarked. Windows dark except for one on the second floor. A guard stood at the side entrance, collar turned up, rifle slung loose. Another smoked by the loading dock, his breath flashing white. Bumpy Johnson studied the scene from across the street. He didn't rush. He counted steps. He listened for echoes. "You said the change is at 3, Bumpy murmured. Ike checked his watch. 2 minutes. The man following them had stopped 2 blocks back. Ike felt it in his spine anyway. Harlem taught you to feel eyes before you saw them. When the minute hand clicked over, the side door opened. The first guard stepped out, stretching, laughing with the man inside. The rifle transferred hands. A small thing. The kind of thing plans depended on. "Now," Bumpy said. They crossed the street like they belonged there. Ike's heart hammered. He kept his face dull, shoulders slumped. Another night worker, nothing to see. At the door, Bumpy spoke before the guard could. "Delivery's late." The guard frowned. "I didn't—" Bumpy's hand came up fast and quiet. The guard folded without a sound, knees buckling. Ike caught him before he hit the ground. They dragged him inside. The warehouse smelled of wood and oil. Crates stacked high, stenciled with shipping marks that meant nothing and everything. Footsteps echoed from deeper inside. "This way," Ike whispered. They moved between rows, shadows breaking them into pieces. At the far end, a metal office glowed with light. Voices inside. 2 men arguing softly. Ike's stomach dropped. "That's new," he breathed. Bumpy didn't ask what he meant. He already knew. They waited. The arguing stopped. A drawer slammed. One of the men stepped out, coat on, hat pulled low. He walked straight toward them. Bumpy shifted, ready. The man passed without looking their way. Ike recognized him anyway. Not from Schultz's crew. From Harlem, a collector who worked both sides when it suited him. "That wasn't supposed to happen," Ike said. "Plans change," Bumpy replied. "People change faster." They reached the office. Inside, the second man sat behind a desk, counting bills. He looked up, eyes widening. "You're not—" Bumpy closed the distance and put him on the floor. Ike shut the door and locked it. Stacks of cash lined the desk. More in an open safe. Not 3 million, but enough to matter. Ike exhaled, a sound halfway to relief. Then Bumpy held up a hand. "Listen," he said. "Boots more than 2, coming fast." The door rattled. A voice barked orders. "They're early," Ike said. Or expected," Bumpy finished. The window shattered inward. Glass sprayed the room. Ike ducked as a gun cracked, deafening in the small space. Bumpy fired back once, precise. A body fell outside with a thud. "Move," Bumpy said. They burst through the back, into a corridor that smelled of damp paper. Another shot rang out. The wall near Ike's head exploded into dust. He stumbled, caught himself. At the exit, Ike skidded to a stop. 2 men blocked the door. Both had guns up, and between them stood the man who'd been following them since Harlem. He smiled at Ike. "You should have stayed home." Bumpy shifted, calculating angles. The men tightened their grips. "This is where you choose," Bumpy said quietly to Ike, without looking at him. The follower stepped closer. "Schultz appreciates initiative, especially from people who know the neighborhood." Ike's mouth went dry. He thought of Lillian, the clinic, the money on the desk behind them, almost enough. "Last chance," the man said. "Step aside." The boots behind them closed in, the corridor filled with breath and heat and the smell of gun oil. Ike looked at Bumpy, then at the door, then back again. His hand moved. But which way, and who would pay for it before the sun rose? Ike's hand moved. Not toward the door, not toward Bumpy. He reached into his coat and pulled out a folded paper, creased, soft from being handled too many times. He dropped it on the concrete between them. The man from Harlem frowned. "What's that supposed to be?" "A receipt," Ike said. His voice shook, but he kept talking. "From the clinic on 125th. They don't take promises, they take cash." The man laughed once. "This ain't—" "I already talked to Schultz," Ike said. The words landed hard. Yesterday, I didn't know about tonight then, but I knew I was running out of time. The corridor went still. Behind them, boots stopped. Guns stayed raised. Bumpy turned his head slowly and looked at Ike. Not angry, not surprised. Just focused, like a man checking the last number in a long equation. "You sold me out," Bumpy said. Ike swallowed. "I tried not to." The follower smiled wider. "See? Smart man. Schultz said Harlem boys would break once you pressed them." Ike's chest tightened. "That's not what this is." The man tilted his head. "Isn't it?" Ike pointed past him back toward the office. "You were never meant to collect the debt. The game, the warehouse, it wasn't about the money you already took from him." The smile faltered. "It was about forcing him to move," Ike continued, "to show his hand. You needed to know who he'd trust under pressure." The man's eyes flicked to Bumpy. Bumpy spoke calmly. "Dutch wanted a list." The follower's jaw set. "You don't know." "He wanted names," Bumpy said. "Runners, collectors, places that still answer my calls. He wanted Harlem mapped by sunrise." Silence. The boots behind them shifted uneasily. Ike took a step forward. "I gave him some names," he said. "The ones already halfway gone. The ones who'd sell themselves cheap." "And you kept the rest," Bumpy said. "Yes," Ike said. "Because if Schultz takes everything, Lillian dies anyway. The clinics close, the runners scatter. There's nothing left to bargain with." The follower raised his gun. "You talk too much." Bumpy moved. He didn't reach for his weapon. He kicked the dropped paper, sent it skidding into the man's shin. The distraction was enough. A shot went wide. Bumpy lunged, slammed the man into the wall, twisted the gun free. The corridor exploded. Gunfire cracked from both ends. One of Schultz's men went down screaming. Another fired blind and hit his own man in the leg. Smoke burned the air. Ike froze for half a second too long. A bullet tore through his coat, hot and close. He gasped, stumbled back. "Move!" Bumpy shouted. They ran, out the side exit, into the fog. Sirens erupted almost immediately, too fast. Bumpy skidded to a stop behind a stack of pallets. He looked at Ike, blood blooming dark on his sleeve. "You hit?" Bumpy asked. "Grazed," Ike said. "I think." Bumpy nodded. "Good. Because now comes the part Schultz didn't plan for." From the warehouse, shouting turned to panic. Police whistles, someone yelling about a fire. Ike stared. "Fire?" Bumpy allowed himself a thin smile. "That office runs on kerosene lamps. One tipped over during the shooting." They listened. Wood crackled. Flames climbed. Men cursed as they ran. "The money," Ike said weakly. "You didn't get it." Bumpy shook his head. "Didn't need it." Ike frowned, confused. "That wasn't Schultz's cash," Bumpy said. "Not really. It was money he was holding for politicians, for police captains, for men who don't like their names near fires." Ike's eyes widened. "So when it burns..." "Schultz has to explain why it's gone," Bumpy finished. "And why his warehouse was hot enough to draw half the precinct before dawn." They moved again, limping now. Toward the river, toward a waiting car Bumpy had placed hours earlier, before the dice ever rolled. Ike's head spun. "You knew," he said, "about me, talking to him." "I knew someone would," Bumpy replied. "That was the point of the loss." They reached the car. Bumpy opened the door, then stopped. "You didn't choose clean," he said to Ike. "You chose crooked. But you didn't choose empty." Ike slumped into the seat, shaking. "Is that enough?" Bumpy closed the door. "For tonight." As the engine turned over, flames licked the warehouse roof behind them, lighting the fog orange. Dutch Schultz would wake up to more than a missing $3 million. He would wake up to questions he couldn't pay off. But Ike, bleeding in the back seat, realized the truth too late. He hadn't escaped the debt. He'd just changed who owned it. And when the fire went out, who would Schultz come for first? Dawn crept in pale and uncertain, like it wasn't sure it wanted to see what the night had done. The warehouse still smoked when the sun reached the river. Firemen moved slow, tired. Police notebooks filled with careful handwriting that left out certain names. By breakfast, the story had already been trimmed down to something manageable. Accidental fire, unknown gunman, cash destroyed. But the consequences didn't stay neat. By 7:15 a.m., Dutch Schultz was awake and furious. The calls he made didn't go the way he expected. A captain who usually answered on the second ring let it go to a secretary. A city councilman claimed a meeting. A bank manager suddenly needed documentation. The missing money had fingerprints all over it, even after it burned. In Harlem, the effect was immediate and brutal. Schultz's collectors pulled back. Not out of mercy, but confusion. Orders conflicted. Men argued over whose problem this was now. The window between command and chaos cracked open just enough for people to breathe. For Ike, the morning was quieter. The car stopped behind a clinic that smelled of bleach and boiled water. Bumpy half carried him inside, past a nurse who didn't ask for names. Blood got on the floor. No one commented. Lillian was awake when they reached her room. Her eyes widened at the sight of Ike's coat, stiff with drying blood. "I'm fine," Ike lied quickly. "It's not mine." She didn't believe him. She didn't argue either. Bumpy left an envelope on the counter, thick, heavy. Not charity, payment. Enough for the medicine, the rent, the winter coal. When Bumpy turned to go, Ike grabbed his sleeve. "Schultz won't forget," he said. "No," Bumpy replied. "He won't." Outside, Harlem felt different. Not safer, just unsettled. Like furniture had been moved in the dark and no one knew what would fall when they reached for it. By noon, word spread that Schultz was demanding names. Hard ones this time. Someone had embarrassed him in front of men who charged interest on silence. That kind of shame didn't fade. And Ike learned the cost of choosing crooked instead of empty. By nightfall, his name disappeared from the runner lists. Doors closed softly when he approached. Friends crossed the street. Protection came with distance now. Lillian lived. But Ike understood what that meant. He had traded a future of small, steady work for a narrow one, guarded by favors and fear. Every knock would sound louder. Every cough would carry weight. And somewhere across the river, a man with a thin mustache and a long memory was deciding how to balance the loss. Because the money hadn't just burned. It had shifted debts that couldn't be settled with cash. When the smoke cleared completely, who would Schultz decide had to pay for the humiliation? The aftershock didn't hit all at once. It rippled. 3 days after the fire, Harlem's numbers board stayed strangely quiet. Chalk lines half-written, runners lingering instead of moving. The pause wasn't mercy, it was hesitation. No one knew whose rules applied anymore. Bumpy Johnson didn't announce anything. He didn't need to. He spent those days walking Lenox and 7th like a man with time, stopping into barber shops, into basements that smelled like cabbage and damp paper. He listened more than he spoke. What he heard was confusion. Schultz's men argued in public now. One collector demanded money that had already been paid. Another backed down when a door didn't open fast enough. The machine still existed, but its timing was off. Gears ground instead of turning. The fire had done something worse than cost money. It had exposed who depended on it. A precinct captain got transferred unexpectedly. A dock foreman stopped returning calls. Two men who'd bragged loudly about Schultz's protection found themselves explaining why that protection didn't extend to arson investigations. And in that space, thin, temporary, Harlem adjusted. Small clubs reopened without raising their prices. Numbers runners spread their drops thinner, safer. It wasn't victory. It was breathing room. For Ike, the days blurred together. He didn't run numbers anymore. He escorted, delivered, sat in rooms and said nothing while other men decided things. His shoulder healed slowly, his nerves didn't. Every night he checked the lock twice. Once he saw the man from the warehouse across the street, hat low, watching the building. Or maybe it was someone who looked like him. Ike never found out. He didn't sleep until dawn. Bumpy visited once more, unannounced. He stood in the doorway, coat on, eyes taking in the room. "She's improving," Ike said, nodding toward the bedroom. Bumpy nodded back. "Good." "You started something," Ike said. It wasn't an accusation. Bumpy looked out the window where Harlem moved like it always had. People adapting, avoiding, surviving. "No," he said. "I interrupted something." The interruption didn't last forever. Within a week, Schultz found his footing. Not fully, but enough. A runner disappeared. A message was sent through a third party, then a fourth. It said the same thing without saying it at all. The debt was remembered. Harlem felt the tension settle back in, different now, sharper. Because everyone knew the balance had shifted, but no one knew how far. The fire hadn't ended anything. It had rearranged the order of who could act first. And somewhere between the river and the Bronx, plans were being rewritten with new margins and fewer mistakes. When the next move came, would it be loud enough for Harlem to hear, or quiet enough to be fatal? Winter arrived early that year. Coal trucks lined up before dawn. Their drivers paid on time. The clinics on 125th stayed open, lights on late into the evening. From the outside, it looked like Harlem had steadied itself. But the cost hid in the details. Bumpy Johnson stopped gambling. Not publicly, not privately. The dice never came out again. Men noticed. They didn't ask why. The $3 million never came back, not in cash, not in ledgers. What returned instead was quieter. Control over which businesses survived the winter, which doors stayed locked, which debts got delayed and which didn't. Ike watched it happen from the edges. Lillian recovered enough to walk the block. She laughed once, surprised by the sound. Ike held on to that moment like a receipt he never wanted to show. But he never ran numbers again. When the neighborhood needed someone expendable to carry messages between sides that didn't trust each other, Ike's name came up. He had survived the fire. That made him useful. It also made him marked. Months later, a man would ask Ike how he'd paid for the clinic. Ike would say, "With something that doesn't spend twice." And somewhere in the Bronx, Dutch Schultz would die not long after, shot in a restaurant screaming, unable to finish his last words. The irony was simple and sharp. The night Bumpy Johnson lost $3 million, Harlem didn't get richer. It got more expensive to control. And the people who paid weren't the ones who rolled the dice. If you want more stories where one decision reshapes everything after it, Subscribe and stay with us for the next one.